Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastic Jamie Chung to talk all about the HBO series Lovecraft Country. And I wanted to start by talking about your audition when you first got a couple of scenes for it, because it sounds like even in that moment, you saw how much possibility there was with this character and how much contextual layering you could bring into her. And so I was just really interested in what those first scenes were that you had the opportunity to read and look into, and how that really helped you in terms of forming her as a character, even in the audition process.
Well, when I first received the script, well, not the script, actually, it was, I believe it was three scenes, or maybe it was even two. Well, one was in Korean and the other one was in English. And they were both pretty heavy scenes, but I was just enthralled immediately. I was like, I cannot believe that there's going to be a show on HBO and one of the episodes is going to be in Korean and it takes place during the Korean War. That in itself was enough to work with. And then having the information of, like, she's a kumiho, she's a nine-tailed fox spirit. She's living in a time where, in Korea, actually, before, there's a lot of historical information context to it. But before the missionaries came to Korea, there was a lot of folklore and people believed in a lot of superstition in Korea. And so the nine-tailed fox spirit is a part of that. And so I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Wow, there's lots of trauma, involved with this family and this young woman who is now a spirit and who now may turn back into a human. I mean, there was a lot, but I was just so excited and titillated that something like this was even going to be made,
And I know that you've grown up speaking Korean, but you still worked with someone to finesse and go a little bit deeper into the language, and in particular, looking at the dialect. With the dialect, did you find that you were also looking at what would the specific, pacing and intonations have been to that time period specifically as well?
Well, first, thank you so much. That's very complimentary. But, I grew up speaking Konglish. So I'm a true Korean American. I was born and raised in San Francisco. My parents speak mainly Korean. And my first language was Korean, but I quickly lost all of that, going to school in the States. And so it was relearning and revisiting. And I think, when you grow up in quite a eclectic city, but when you experience certain forms of otherness, when your otherness is pointed out by other people, it kind of makes you embarrassed for being different, right? Especially at such a young age. And so throughout my childhood and young adulthood, I kind of shunned my own culture, not because I hated it, but because I wanted to fit in, And so I grew up speaking Korean, I learned it, but my Korean's very limited. And so it was kind of like thrusting myself back in, and it's kind of sparked this. I'm like, this year I'm going to like take on Korean, and I'm going to I want to like, I want to graduate from, let's say, the 5th grade, right? And so every year I kind of put it off. And this kind of forced me to, to put my foot on the gas and really go for it. So it was a wild one. And so I worked with a dialect coach. I worked with all of my family members when it came to the actual audition. But what was so great about this was that they wanted to find the right person, but also they weren't so concerned about the Korean because they wanted to give you all the resources to succeed. And so that's what I felt. I felt very supported when I jumped onto the show because I had months to prepare, and they gave me literally anything that I needed or asked for, as many hours as I wanted with my dialect coach. And that is rare. It's rare that anyone would receive that kind of support from a studio and from the executive producers, but I did, and I was really fortunate.
Yeah. And in mentioning that, I mean, the amount of research and preparation that you did for this role is so hugely monumental. And like you said, you spent months on it. And some of that also included dance lessons and singing lessons.
My
And
God,
even though it's
with an accent, it was just insane. It was like, I mean, really, we shot, we shot a movie. Like that's what we did. I mean, the props, down to every detail of like the vehicles, the home, the architecture. Like they brought in someone from Korea to help guide them build a proper traditional house. It was just, I've never experienced anything like it, but truly it was the most difficult roles that I've ever done. And I'm so proud of the product that we have for people to enjoy.
Yeah. And the dancing and the singing, such an interesting aspect to get that meticulous in terms of detail, because this is a character who is learning about the world through American movies and through watching Judy Garland films. And you said that you wanted to absorb some of her mannerisms into your character. And so I wanted to ask about what those details and mannerisms were that you wanted to bring into your performance.
Yeah. Well, this young woman, she doesn't know how to be a woman. So she's a kamiho. So when she takes a soul, and it's usually a male soul, she kind of takes on all of his memories and life experiences. So she doesn't remember what it was like to be a young girl. In fact, she only remembers the young girl that she embodies because of the memories of the stepfather, who had abused her. So watching these Judy Garland movies, how to behave like a young woman, how to interact like a young woman, how to fall in love like a young woman. Like this is all that she learned from Judy Garland, even her dance moves or how she speaks to people or, she gives a gaze. Like it's everything. It's textbook Judy Garland, but to her, it was really like a window into the world of what it's like to be a young girl, a young woman. So it's really cool. Yeah. And I'm glad you caught that.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about your working relationship with Misha Green, because it just sounds like she was so phenomenally supportive. And I love the sound of a conversation that you had with her very early on, in which you were asking her about how your character was there in support of Atticus, Jonathan Major's character. And her response was actually, she's not there in support of him. This is her own story. And in particular with that episode. And how did that moment and that conversation completely fundamentally change the way that you were thinking about her in terms of character and the way that you were thinking about bringing her to screen once you had that huge tool?
I mean, it was just a click. And once it clicked, I don't think it'll ever be able to go backwards. Like it was truly an aha moment. And I forget the details of what conversation, but I think it had something to do with the later episode, or I think it had to do with the detail of episode 6 and how it served Atticus's storyline, because he is one of the leads of the show. And very plainly, she's like, no, this is, what is your journey? What is your perspective? What does she want? This is her story. Like, what does Gia need? What does she want? What motivates her? Don't think about him. What motivates her? And such a simple thing to point out, but no one has ever pointed that out to me. If anything, in other, even in the classes that I've taken, it's just, how do these supporting characters serve the main story, the A storyline, right? And in every job that I've been a part of like the B storyline. It's, and so, yeah, it's just shifted everything. And it was so empowering because I finally had a person that I look up to as a storyteller, who is a woman of color, who is running the show, and who really cared about my perspective and what I had to contribute, and looked at me as an equal, really. That in itself was so empowering. Yeah, it was really special, but it's changed the way that I look at my work. Before I kind of approached it in a meek way, like, oh, I'm just so grateful to be here. I don't know, this isn't my show, but I'm so, how does my character, I'm so happy to be a part of the show, and how does my character serve, the other characters? And it was just, no, now I look from it from a very strong and independent point of view, you know, and I bring that to my work now. It's like, these are her intentions. This is a journey and this is it, you know, it's great.
And there's an incredible complexity to the emotional journey that this character goes on. You know, as a Kamiho, like you said, it's not her own experience, it's the experience and memories of these souls. But as that really, you know, that episode that focuses in on everything, as it flows, she all of a sudden starts to have some of her own moments and some of her own feelings and some of her own emotions again. And so I was very interested in how you mapped out that trajectory and how you found a really gradual and nuanced way to start thinking about that evolution and development in character.
Yes. Well, Gia was always told what to do. You know, when she was brought back into this world by, you know, as to embody the Kamiho in this young woman's body, she was always told by her mother that you have to take 100 souls in order to return back to my daughter again, right? Before all the trauma that she had, so that she can relive her life in innocence and not have that terrible experience or remember that terrible experience. And so she was always doing what she was told. You know, she was always doing what she was told in her society, told how to be a good daughter, how to bring honor back into a family. Like, she was always told what to do. And finally, she has a moment and a connection and needs and wants, and she listens to that little voice, you know, and she kind of, you know, and then she takes control of her own life, and it's like, what do I need? And it was a gradual thing. And you talk about the nuances, and it was quite fun to play, because you have, you know, you have this perspective of a Kamiho, and then you have these little moments that really make her think, whether it's life lessons from her best friend Youngja or her connection with Atticus. It's all very pivotal moments. And so, you know, all of her life experiences are the first time this Kamiho experiences it, whether it's a moment of love, whether it's a moment of friendship, whether it's a moment of anger, betrayal, devastation, you know, when she loses Youngja. So these are all very big moments that happen, you know, all within a very short time frame in her adulthood. So it's just lots of fun. Again, one of my favorite roles I've ever played, but there's a lot to work with.
I'm so fascinated as well about your process when it comes to thinking about backstory for her as a character, because, you know, exactly as you said, it's not her own experience, it's these 99 other people. And so how meticulous and detailed did you want to get in thinking about who would these characters be, whose soul she's taken, whose memory she's absorbed? You know, obviously there's the stepfather, that's a really pivotal one, but then there's so many other possibilities that you had the opportunity to play with.
I think she understands, especially from a male perspective, lust and desire and needs, right? I think she can turn that on like a flip, like a switch. She can flip it on like a switch. She easily knows what a man wants and desires and needs. And that's such a weird thing, because even from her stepfather's perspective, like how, and in a way it's love, and it's a wrong kind of love. And this is dialogue that, you know, the mother had to Chia, but she was like, no, that's a bad kind of love. And so from her perspective, it's like, but how is it bad? So she doesn't, even though she understands a lot, there's so much she doesn't understand, you know?
Yeah. And with that idea of there being so much that she doesn't understand, I think you really play into that a lot as well, in terms of there being a very observational quality to your performance. When we look at the scenes, you know, with Gia and the other nurses in the hospital, they're all in one side of the room, and she's almost just standing on the outside looking in and watching them and observing the way that they converse with each other. Was that something that you and Misha talked about a lot? Because we even see it in the detailing of how that scenes like that are blocked.
Well, it's actually it was all in the script. And so bringing that to life and having that knowledge, it was important to carry on throughout the arc of the entire journey of this character. But yeah, that's what happens when you have excellent writing, because it sparks, your curiosity, but also as an actor, like, how do I, oh, that's a really interesting perspective. Let's really deep dive into that and see where that can go. And if it was in this situation, how can we carry on that information that we learned previously? And so you just continue to build on with that. But truly, that's what happens when you have amazing writing.
And was it very much as well in the detailing of the scripts when it comes down to that scene that we see early on in the episode where she is taking someone's soul, and we see what that is for the first time? Because again, it's such an internalized performance where the camera isn't shying away. It's really, really close up on your face. And we're seeing almost this emotional disconnect that she has to go through. And then the processing of like, oh, this is happening again, but it's still shocking to her at the same time. And there's so many things that you manage to bring into that moment without having any dialogue in those scenes.
Thank you. Well, no, that was a personal choice to do, but immediately I don't know why I resonated with this character so much, but minus the killing and the sucking of the souls and tentacles and whatnot. But there was something about her, because I think it very much plays into my experience growing up as Asian American. We're told to do and told to act a certain way, and society tells us, how to behave and what's expected from us. And then we find our voice, and then we decide to flip that. But all those nuances of learning and watching and, yeah, that's all. That was all a choice.
And it sounds like you had an immense amount of detail in terms of what that scene was going to look like, with there being drawings that you were given that even would just be laying around the set for you to constantly reference. But how did you then work with Misha and the director in terms of what that was going to look like in terms of the physical motion? Because you have to be giving a very physical performance at that point that's responding to everything that's coming out and processing through her body.
Yeah, I think again, the details of the script, but they gave me some incredible special effects, gave me some crazy, amazing visuals. And I think I actually have a picture of it, and I can send it to you so maybe you can share it with your audience. But it's really haunting. And it's a picture of a woman, and she has the tentacles out, and she's in pure ecstasy, and yet she's haunted by the memories. And like, if you were just if I guess the image I would describe is, if you take all of this feeling, whether it's pure ecstasy and anger and fear, and you kind of pump into your body all at once, like, what kind of shock would that bring to your body? That's what the visual had to me. Like, when I saw that visual, I felt it. I knew exactly what I needed to do in order to bring to my performance. But yes, we had some amazing visual aid on the show, and you had to, because that's the only way to plan such a show like this, because you could write it and try to explain it to someone, or an executive, or Misha, this is Misha's vision, but you need the visuals, because you think it's one way, and then you see it kind of in the visual special effects and whatnot. You're like, whoa, it's crazy. It's a lot crazier than I thought I had first imagined, but that is all credit to our mad scientist, Misha Green.
And it sounds like the logistical setup was incredibly intricate for that as well. In having a rig where there was fake blood literally hanging right above your head so that it could be pulled and rigged at the right moment. And so was it something where it had to be really, really meticulously blocked out and choreographed as well?
Absolutely. There are a lot of like dry runs, as we call it, which I feel like is very appropriate for this. And yeah, you're basically just hanging out naked for like an entire week, getting ready for this shot. That's what it felt like to me, but I wasn't really. But on the day, it's like such simple special effects, and yet it brings so much to our show. But yeah, there were a lot of dry runs before we completely decimated the set with gallons of blood.
I wanted to jump back a little bit more to talking about the mother-daughter relationship, because there's so many complexities to that as well. And even when you look at the history of the time period and the place and the setting, and the fact that her mother had a daughter out of wedlock and then married someone who was willing to come in and be a parental figure, and what all of that means to her as a character, how did that play into a lot of your character construction in terms of those details?
I feel like there's so much in this culture, in a lot of Asian cultures, but in particular Korean culture, there's so much shame and there's so much value on one sex over another, and it's kind of the way things were structured. When you're born a female, you get married off and you lose your family name and you become part of that family, and you say goodbye to your family. If you are a son of the family, you stick around, you watch your parents grow old, you're expected to take care of them as they get older. That's the Confucian way. And so there's a lot of stuff from my own personal family that I was able to use for this character. But yeah, there's a lot of shame and pain that comes from this, and sacrifice. And the mother feels like she's sacrificed so much for her daughter, even calling on the spirits to turn her into Kamiho was a sacrifice. Even marrying that man to bring pride back into the family was a sacrifice. And so there's that storyline of sacrifice and pride and shame is splattered all over this episode. Yeah.
The scripts also seem like they have so much detail in terms of just what does the day-to-day world of this character look like, even when it comes down to what food are they eating. It's winter time, they're also trying to store food, and that those tiny details of day-to-day life again just build so much of an idea of her world. And how did you then take details like that in the script and marry that into a lot of that preparation and research that you were doing to really construct out the overall just day-to-day and the smaller simplistic moments?
Yeah. Again, it's knowing the history, but also during that time, what resources were available, what weren't. And again, this is all immense research that the writers and Misha Green did beforehand, as well as the set decorators and props people. That's what was so special about this show overall, Lovecraft, is that people cared so much about the details, and people cared so much about the show and telling an authentic story, even though it's in a horror and sci-fi genre. It was important that they got the details right, and they did, knowing that. And again, my parents also helped with some of this research because they're on the older side, and so they lived through the Korean War, and they were able to share some information. But it's very specific, knowing the history is important, but who was in this country and why were they there, and what were their intentions. So you have the U.S. Army base. So you had food provisions sent to Korea. So Spam was a big diet. Spam was introduced into Korean culture, as well as hot dogs and other American foods. Korea was a lot of poor farmers, who had lost all of their land to Japanese imperialists. And so none of them really owned a lot of their own land. And, rice was white rice was like the gold currency during those times. And so what are the things they could afford? They couldn't afford expensive meats. They didn't have the means for that. So a lot of the diet was based on, grains and pickled vegetables. And that's why Korean people eat kimchi and other things that are pickled, because it was the one thing that these poor people can afford and also maintain during really cold winters. So yeah, it's a deep dive into our culture, but also our history. And there was a wave of Confucianism where they didn't eat meat, and it was a lot of vegetables and pickled vegetables and grains. So yeah, it's all there and it's all in the show, which I find so amazing.
Yeah. And when you step back and look at your performance as a whole, what's really phenomenal about it is you've given this performance where you have to push it into the extreme elements of the show and into the genre elements. And then at the same time, you're giving this incredibly intimate internal performance in a lot of scenes as well. And so, how did you navigate really those two very juxtaposed types of performance, but bringing them into the same character and into the same moments?
I mean, it's absolute preparation. It's knowing where this character is at this exact moment, knowing all the before moments, and really mapping that out. But truly, it's about having all that knowledge, and then it's about just throwing it all away on the day. Because that's now it's in you, and you know all of your intentions. It's all there, and now it's really feeling. And I've never, ever worked with such an like this team. Even my scene partner Atticus, played by Jonathan Majors, for episode 6 specifically, because I worked with all the other actors, and again, they all brought it, but I've never, they're true artists, they're real actors. They're able to just completely embody their characters, and they're so invested in every scene, and they deserve, I feel like they're, sadly, I mean, of course they're recognized for it, but I really feel like they deserve so much more, because it was pretty magical what happened on these sets. And to have a director like Helen Shaver, who is also an actress who has been in this industry for so long, but she's such a sensitive, wonderful storyteller. She helped guide us, and she really pushed us. And even though, as a vulnerable actor in already vulnerable situations, you want to put your foot down and you want to put your walls up, she just chipped away at those walls, and she was able to get some really powerful performances, because it was a moment of truth, and it was agonizing. Trust me. It was painful at some times. Like, I just did not want to do that, because it's in my nature. And I think that's the reason why I love acting so much, is because I can be vulnerable without having any pride, um, but yeah, I really commend all the other actors on the show. Like, to be around Michael K. Williams and Journey Smollett and Jonathan and Anjanou Ellis and Wumi Mosaka, like, they are just incredible actors, incredible scene partners. That's really the secret to it. Ugh, they're so good.
It's such a phenomenal cast across the board on
Yeah.
the show. And when kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about that conversation with Misha and how it's really changed the way that you think about character not being in service of the story, but being their own individual story. You've spoken about how this role in this project in particular is in the way that it pushed you so far outside of your comfort zone and the things that it asked of you, that it's really given you a new level of confidence in yourself. And even to the point where, following this, you went out and pitched and sold one of your own shows as well as a series. And so how do you feel that this project has just completely irrevocably changed the way that you're now approaching everything in your life as an artist and as a storyteller?
I think it's quite simple. And I think it's being unapologetic for just your existence, being unapologetic of your needs and what you need, being unapologetic to what you need in order just to succeed, right? Yeah, but it was again an aha moment, because it taught me my self-worth and my value, and that's priceless. But that's something that I will continue to carry on through my work, but also yeah, knowing my value in as a storyteller, not just an actor. And I think that is like the greatest gift. That is so powerful. But that is what this show and Misha Green gave me.
So every single time I come back to watching any of this show, whether it's, a few scenes, an episode, or multiple moments in it, there's just so many other things to unpack. And I really think this is a show that's going to continue being part of the fabric of our culture for so many years. And congratulations on everything in your performance in this show. And thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you so much. Wow, your questions. Wow. I mean, my goodness, thank you for going there. I didn't expect this to go so deep. And, I think I needed this reminder. I was having one of those days. So you're very helpful. Thank you so much.